How about if we talk about that we went to see Napoleon?
I don't know where the show's going after Napoleon, spoiler, dies.
Well, they cut out a whole 6-year period there where he was living on that island. So
you think it's going to be like the Spartacus series where they go back in time?
Spoiler.
Is that a spoiler? Why don't we just cut this out?
I say we leave it in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Co-Pilots. Today, we're going to talk about an incredible pilot called Steel Justice.
That's right. This is one of those pilots that I feel like forcing on Kevin, our producer, and Sean.
Yeah, very much so. Well, this whole show you forced on us a little bit.
Yes, they both said, we don't want to do a podcast with you, and we specifically don't want to do one about pilots.
Kevin and I had a whole podcast planned about second episodes.
Right. And I was like, hey, why don't we go back one? And that's how we ended up here. Mm-hmm. This pilot is of the style that is a failed pilot, a failed first episode that never went to series, which will become increasingly obvious. If any of you have watched it, you can find it on YouTube. They're under the title Steel Justice or Robosaurus. And,
can we talk about that for a second? Robosaurus?
Sure. Absolutely, please.
Like the kid calls it Robosaurus. Like we'll get to this whole thing, but the guy says it's a Robosaur, and he goes, "It's not a Robosaur, it's Robosaurus." And I just thought that was
late in the pilot. He renames it.
Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm sorry the kid got killed, but at the same time, he was a bit of a pain in the ass. You know?
Oh, you think that kid had it coming?
A little bit. Also, I was like, why? I mean, I get it, but I was also thinking of an alternate pilot where the thing was called Dinobot. Uh-huh. And it feels like that could have served just as well as the name of the thing.
Why do you prefer Dinobot? Or you're just pitching
it's just a cute name, you know. It's like, oh, let's bring up the Dinobot.
That's the problem with it, Sean. It's not like a terrifying, like Tyrannosaurus that is munching cars and blowing fire,
Mm-hmm.
Like as we all know, the dinosaurs did.
Right. Well, but here's what I'm saying is, do you think that Dinobot would have done better in terms of marketing and they could have gotten picked up eventually,
I don't think if the pilot was the same, I don't think slapping Dinobot on it would have made that much difference. But I do wonder.
I guess we'll never know, will we?
Well, I'll say this. I do wonder. This is the key question.
Mm-hmm.
The featured aspect of this pilot is clearly the thing they build up to very late in the show, which is this giant dinosaur robot mech, which, rolls through the city eating cars and grabbing villains.
Eating cars and eating bars like Blondie.
That's exactly right, Sean. And the question to me is, well, because on YouTube, it is sort of, I think it says Robosaurus, then in parentheses, Steel Justice. The actual title of the show was Steel Justice, as far as I know. Why they didn't call it Robosaurus, I'm sure that must have been consideration. Because if I may get into, and I don't know the specific backstory, so once again, call our tip line. If you worked at NBC or you were involved in this production and you know exactly what the tenuous connections were of how this happened, but Doug Malowicki, who created an actual Robosaurus, which was this giant robot that breathed fire and chewed cars. He built it for monster truck car shows in the late 1980s, and he walked away thinking it was extremely stupid. But it was sort of brought into action and showed up at a bunch of these shows and became popular with many children.
Some adults.
I would have been excited. The problem with it was that it took forever when it picked up a car and started chewing on it, it would take forever to kind of do any damage to it. So you had to just watch it slowly chewing, which is By the way, that is the way you should eat. Apparently, really,
you get all the nutrients that way.
You masticate. Yes, it's easier on digestion. So maybe that's
let's
what.
Let's not get into mastication.
I'm just saying, Robosaurus was responsible to himself from a nutritional perspective. Anyway, that was a problem with it. It could slowly roll. It took a long time, I think, to transport, so they didn't keep doing it. However, it was somehow someone thought, you know what this really should be is a television show. This slow-moving giant robot dinosaur should be a television show. And that is how Steel Justice came to be, I assume.
Well, they took the character of the Robosaurus and they also took the ethos of slow moving.
and they said this character and this tone of something that feels like you can't believe how slow it's moving forward should be a television show. And that's exactly what they did.
We need people to sit there and chew over the show very slowly as they're watching.
And it somehow ended up at NBC. I don't know how Christopher Crowe, who both wrote and directed this pilot episode, although he wrote it with John Hill. I don't know how it ended up in his hands. It seems clear that it was presented to him as like, we want to make something about this Robosaurus robot that's at these monster truck shows. And then he sort of brainstormed on it and created a bunch of other elements that we'll get into how well they work.
Hint, very well.
A little backstory on Christopher Crowe. He created, oddly, BJ and the Bear, which was another episode that Sean and I started to do, but then we realized it wasn't accessible, like it's not out there on any platform that you could purchase, so we just sort of figured we'd kick that to later. Was that what happened?
Yeah, and I just want to be clear because people may not even remember that show, but it was about BJ McKay and his best friend Bear.
Very well known. And also, as another clarification, Bear was a monkey, which actually is the kind of reasoning that we see aplenty in this Steel Justice episode. He hadn't really directed that much. He did a couple of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, a Miami Vice. And then in 1988, he wrote Off Limits, which is a movie about two cops in Saigon with Gregory Hines and Willem Dafoe, which sounds very much to me like it's a fake movie that would be in a separate parody. And then in the background, they'd say, well, he's working on Off Limits.
Now, I don't know where you get your information from, but I started, and you're the information guy, but I started to look this up on IMDb. Okay. And according to IMDb, Christopher Crowe also wrote The Last of the Mohicans. That's what it says on his IMDb page.
Well, that was what I was going to build to. And so this is the crazy thing is he is credited for Last of the Mohicans the same year he is credited for this. Right. So I have to assume the heat that is coming from Last of the Mohicans somehow lent him the credibility to go, I want to do my dream. And then they said, well, you can do something about Robosaurus. And he says, all right, I'm going to fit Robosaurus into my dream, which is this cop dystopian Blade Runner thing.
But here's the thing. Because I was like, no fucking way did this guy write Last of the Mohicans.
Right.
So I went to the Last of the Mohicans page, and he is not listed as a writer on that page. Maybe I just didn't have enough coffee this morning. But whatever the case, I hope that he did. And I hope you're right, because it's insane that the same person who wrote Last of the Mohicans is also responsible for this show.
I mean, it seems like he co-wrote Last of the Mohicans with Michael Mann. So I don't know if it seems like that's likely a situation where he came up with the concept, wrote the screenplay, and then Michael Mann worked his magic on it.
Like AKA, a WGA credits thing?
I assume so. And maybe he just was stuck crediting. This is totally unfair for me to say, but maybe he was stuck crediting Crowe because, The Last Mohicans being derived from the book would have a lot of the same plot points. And so whatever the case, that's certainly a crazy career path. And I don't know, let's get into it.
Great. So starting with the opening credits, we are in an unexplored world, lots of old school maps. Where are we? Where is the end of the where's the end of the world? And then
I would say just even on that, first of all, I think it has a great sort of dumb sci-fi opening musical themes, like a lot of synth. There's synth all through this, and I kind of enjoy that. But then the map seems to have it's sort of an ancient map. It's kind of a seafaring map. There's also like a centaur on it. It seems like it's not clear whether it's monsters or mythology or an actual map. And to me, that kind of, even looking, it's kind of a mystical vibe. And then the sort of visuals, there's a kind of a time tunnel-y kind of effect. And the music, it starts out as kind of a time tunnel, kind of sci-fi theme. And then it goes to more of an adventure theme. And it's showing this map. And to me, that's going to show a little bit of the split personality of this whole pilot episode, which is just like it's a billion different ideas put in at once.
It's funny that you said time tunnel, because I wrote space tunnel because it was in space, but I guess any tunnel in space is basically going to be a time tunnel. And,
you're saying the visual was a space tunnel, because I don't know that we know it was a space tunnel, do we?
No, I'm saying it was in the stars, and then all of a sudden a tunnel appeared.
Oh, then it was a space tunnel. You were
correct.
No.
I'm saying, because then I wrote time. Is that supposed to be a time portal? Because, and I didn't even know anything about the show yet, but I was like, okay, anytime there's a tunnel in space, there's going to be time travel involved, you know? And then we get into some really deep narration about, since the world began, time travelers have journeyed across the globe on a pilgrimage to locate and nurture people with the gift of transformation. And we see some weird visuals of, apparently Odysseus had some transformational powers because he carved a tiny wooden horse and made it into the Trojan horse. Stonehenge was made by these people. It was a bunch of pebbles that turned into a giant ring of rocks.
Right. Although it seems like if he was making the Trojan horse and then could do the same thing that Nash, the main character, does with Robosaurus, it seems like it would have been more useful for him to make either a giant horse, an actual giant horse, or some giant monster, as opposed to a fake horse with a bunch of people in it.
You think the Trojan War would have gone better with Robosaurus?
Well, clearly it went well for them anyway, but I just feel like
it didn't go great for Odysseus because it took him 10 years to get home.
Well, he should have created a giant hawk or something to carry him.
Or a compass.
A giant compass wouldn't have made much sense. Great digression.
Yeah. So he it turns out he's been dreaming. He's asleep. He's on a stakeout.
Yeah.
And he wakes up and he tells his partner he's having this dream, the same dream about Davy. We don't know who Davy is yet, but we're certainly going to find out.
And right off the bat, I will say that I had some confusion even in picking apart who is who in this episode, because the main character's name is David Nash and his son's name is Davy Nash, his deceased son. So that's good choices right off the bat.
Yeah, one of the things that's important in pilots is that every character have a name as similar as possible to every other character. You want to make sure
right in the moment when you're trying to figure out who everybody is. That's when
just
you want to
make sure people are indistinguishable.
How about if we name every character Rob?
Hey, it's the Rob Show. What are they going to do? They're going to rob people.
That actually would add up.
Yeah. So they're on this stakeout, and this has one of my favorite TV and movie tropes, but not in a good way, which is that he picks up I don't know what it is, like a muffin or a bagel or something, and he sniffs it, and then, it's bad, and he throws it away. And I just love that everybody in these shows is always sniffing stuff to see if it's okay. Like, this was clearly something that he bought wrapped off a shelf. Like, Hostess Twinkies last for thousands of years, and this was not that, but it was in the same family, and yet at the same time he feels it's necessary to like check and make sure this thing hasn't gone bad in the several hours they've spent at this stakeout.
Well, the actor is making it his own. He's making that moment. He's like, it's got to be more organic. And I'm doing that.
Well, go ahead.
The character's played by Robert Taylor, who is Australian and later became Longmire. Are you a Longmire fan? No.
I'm not even a dilettante.
And he was also, to give you some of his background, he was one of the agents in The Matrix, not Agent Smith. And then he was in a series of unknown shows that I wonder if they were Australian, because I don't even recognize the titles. One was Good Guys, Bad Guys, Wild Side, Blue Healers, Stingers, and then appropriately, Muggers was another one.
He was almost in the Rob show.
Yes. In the Muggers show, they were all called Mugs.
Hey, Mugsy. Yeah, Mugs.
And he is Australian. I haven't seen Longmire, so I can't tell you how his accent is in that. I know he's a sheriff in that. I don't know if he's from Australia or if he just perfected his American accent, because his American accent in this is classic. I'm from England or Australia or New Zealand, and I'm playing a quote cop in a city. So I'm going to do a New York 40s cab driver from movies and television shows. Mm-hmm. And it's not convincing in any way.
There's also, I don't know, it drives me crazy when they do that, especially because there's certain words that sound so off. And I know it's not healthy for me to be driven crazy by this, but even though he's trying so hard to pronounce things correctly, when they get to words like his or him, they cannot say those words without saying he's or him. And it's just like it's like a blinking neon light in the middle of a sentence when they say one of those words, you know?
He had some line later where it's like, to me, was the most distinct, like, oh man, did he just give up at a certain point? Mm-hmm. There was this weapon out the back rocket shooting device of some kind.
I agree with you. I did get the sense that at some point he was just like, I'm done. I'm just going to be myself.
This pilot isn't going anywhere. Forget about this.
Or they fired the dialect coach, you know?
Yes. Somehow based on the budgetary, what looks like the budget was of this, I doubt they had a dialect coach.
Yeah. There's quite an aesthetic to this show in terms of what it looks like.
I mean, I always find it admirable, and I'm kind of on board. So I'm like, I will make fun of it, but I'm really like, if I'm a kid and I'm watching this, even whatever, a teenager, if I'm a nerdy adult, I kind of am like, hey, you know what? Go for it. I don't care if it kind of looks a little chintzy. Like, show me the thing that you want to show me. So I'm kind of on board for that.
Whereas
it's
I'm
not
like,
done with any artfulness, though. It's all backlit, kind of hiding, kind of weird smoke, and just like real, very 90s, like crappy 90s.
Yeah.
In terms of the fake noir aspect.
Like, what would happen if they shot Blade Runner in a dimly lit parking garage?
Well, this is. I mean, I'm going to hit them as we go, but I think the failing, the biggest fail. There are a lot of failings of this, but it's that they were trying to mix too many things into the pot, and Blade Runner is the most dominant strain that they were trying to mix into this pot, and they were trying to sort of capture the dark future cop noir, dingy dystopian city aspect of Blade Runner, and then mix it with this magical dinosaur robot.
And here's another thing that I thought was interesting was there's an explanation in the next scene that fluorocarbons have destroyed the ozone layer, so everything is
the environmentalists were right.
Too warm. What that means is that there are spinning fans with lights behind them in every scene, so that there's always an effect of like, oh, this is noir. This is so noir. There's a fan with a light behind it. And I just wonder if they came up with the fan idea first or the global warming idea,
They also have, in terms of the style, I was kind of shocked when they kind of went to more of the, I guess it's a little Blade Runner, but Blade Runner, the sort of noir 40s aspects are kind of around the edges, other than, say, Sean Young's haircut and stuff like that. Whereas this, like, old-timey cars just halfway through the pilot just start rolling through everything. Yeah, and so it feels, again, for them to mix in a little bit more of an Escape from New York vibe, which is also the essential problem. Is it's never clear in this he starts with saying 21st century, things sure have changed. Not all of them for the better. And it's not clear, are there old cars because new cars were made? Are they being made to look like old cars? Is this a fully dystopian city where crime is on every corner, which it kind of seems like the show is saying at certain points? Or is it just, regular people in a sort of, they have some future tech and, there are good citizens, there are bad. It's just like, it's never clear how bad things are.
It's really, really hot, though, and everybody still wears coats. That bothered me because it's like, if this was true about the atmosphere, wouldn't people adapt somehow and wear less clothing? But apparently that doesn't happen in those kind of situations. So they're in the B sector.
And people are constantly talking about how hot it is.
Yeah. They do a great thing here, which is a great thing to do in pilots, which is they have the narrator introduce about 60 characters over the course of 12 seconds who you obviously know are going to be super important to the episode until it turns out they're only in 2 scenes the entire show.
Now, let me ask you a question about the VO, Sean. Do you feel like that, as will often happen in pilots, that was an 11th hour ad to the cut? Or do you feel like it was like, it's kind of a noir thing and they always had that as part of it?
I think that's my take on it, is like, let's have him narrate everything that happens, right, and we can use that for exposition. So he can tell us about, the global warming, the Central Asian wars get brought up at one point.
Yeah. There's a lot of world building.
Yeah. And that's all in that first scene. Bill Soames, Julio Melendez, my buddy Steve Tauntaun or something like that.
Yes.
His buddy Steve, who we know is his buddy because they have a special handshake where they slap the back of their hands together.
Yes, or it's sort of a non-touching high five. That's how people greet each other in the future.
And they're there because they're going after one of the worst people in the entire B sector, if not in the entire city, which is somebody named Arturo Gomez. Yeah.
That's right.
He does a lot of bad things. He does extortion. He does pornography, or I'm assuming he doesn't participate himself. He markets pornography, peddles heavy-duty street drugs to school children.
He's just a PR guy for pornography? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, he's got slogans. He wears buttons promoting it. And he sells weapons. And that seems like that would have been enough, because that's what the whole show is about, is the weapons thing. But instead, they got it like gild the lily a bit with he sells heavy-duty street drugs to school children. Not to anybody.
No.
Just to school children.
I mean, I think this guy's a bad guy.
Mm-hmm. And he's holed up in a downtown Fleabag, which just made me think, I wish I was watching a different pilot right now, because Fleabag is delightful.
Also has a giant robot dinosaur, though.
Not in episode 1, but later on.
That's who she has the affair with. Hot robot dinosaur.
Then they light a fire. We're into a rooftop chase scene. They flush Arturo Gomez out, and David Nash is chasing him across rooftops, and that just looked weird to me. Like, I don't know, it was so fake looking somehow,
It is, I think 90% of it is exactly what you're saying. Some of it you can say it's like, all right, well, it was the 90s. It's a weathered copy of it that we're watching, but I don't think it would be that different. But once again, I don't know, even on the budget they did, how they did the stunt of him jumping off the building and crashing through the window. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's my own, just because my assumption is that it was practical effects, unless it was a miniature. But I don't think it was a miniature. I think it was
it was a real person. Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, there's moments because I agree with you. Like, other than that, it looks like they lit it in 7 minutes.
Right. And also everything
city.
Everything is shot so tightly, I felt like we were always in close up on everybody. So yeah, you could see smoke in the background and lights, but there was no distinguishable shapes of any kind.
Yeah.
No scenery. So he gets into a shootout with Arturo Gomez. He shoots Arturo, I guess, in the leg, maybe.
You gotta keep that great character.
But an old man also gets shot, and he gets taken away from the crime scene in a hearse. I didn't know that hearses just immediately showed up to the scene when somebody died.
This guy's dead. Bypass anything else. Just go right to the hearse.
Yeah. And I wasn't even sure. Like, part of me was like, because they showed it for a second, I was like, wait, was that a hearse? Or was that supposed to be a weird looking ambulance? And then like they came back ambulance. To it again. Yeah. They came back to it and it was like, oh no, that's definitely a hearse. They were just like, let's give somebody's in tight with the funeral director and they're like, call Gary. We got another dead one. He can get away with it.
Was it the Ecto one? Were the Ghostbusters there? I mean, they might as well throw them in. They have every other genre device in here in this pilot. And then they're talking about the guns, the scorpions, right. Mm-hmm. And the line I love that his partner Gina, who he's been partnered with for years, says, bee hoppers and cool juice runners suddenly got better stuff than we got.
Yeah. And I don't know, I guess cool juice runners to me meant people who, like, I didn't figure this out in the moment, but eventually I was like, oh, they're talking about people
who like Sunny Delight.
Cold water. No, like the people who have cold water because they have ice are called cool juice runners. Like you have to get your illegal shipment of ice.
I see. Black market cold water.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But the other thing, I was like, I have no idea what that's supposed to be. Maybe those guys are like the Bloods and the Crips of the 21st century.
I guess so. I think it's just, it's just very fast dystopian world building.
Right. So then we're in his apartment and we learn that he lives alone because his son died and his wife moved out. It was too much for their marriage.
Right. Get that from VO again.
Yeah, and he's sleeping.
Right. They have a fun future cooking plate where he puts the food on and then it just cooks the food.
Mm-hmm. That's how it's going to be.
Oh man, I can't wait for that, Sean.
Well, that was like my dorm room in college too, though. You
had a hot plate.
Yeah, just a hot plate. And then he's dreaming about what happened to his son, which looked horrible because his son was in the car. He was at the house to get the Robosaurus, and somebody shot the son with a bazooka, which seems like a lot to me.
Seems like overkill, yes.
Yeah. It was also weird. I guess they kind of explain it later, but it felt weird to me that his son was in an actual car and he was in the house. Like it was just a weird.
He went back in maybe to get the Robosaurus. He definitely went back in to get something for the kid.
That was what they explained later. But in the moment, I was just watching it and going, "Wait, why is the kid in the car and he's in the house?"
See, they're one step ahead of you, Sean. They were like, "Oh,
this is how the world is for me. I'm always one step behind." So anyway, the kid gets blown up with a rocket launcher or a bazooka or an RPG, whatever it is. It's a horrific, grisly death.
Right.
And the guy is still dreaming, and then his dream guide shows up, who we've already seen earlier in the credit sequence.
Right. Now, this is played by Jay Preston, and the character is, I think, Jeremiah. It could be Jay Jonas, but it might have been.
I thought it was J. Jonah Jameson. Isn't he the
Jeremiah J. Jonah Jameson, which is really too much of a lift. But Jeremiah Jonas, he's been in Few Good Men. He was in Albert Brooks' Real Life, is amazing as Dr. Cleary. And mostly I know him from Remo Williams. Weirdly, as Con McCleary. So I wonder if, like, when they were casting, they needed to change something, and then Cleary was in the guy's name from Real Life, and like, oh, let's cast him, and just cast him as another, instead of Dr. Cleary, he'll be Mac Cleary. It's very strange. Anyway, it could just be a
you have a interesting perspective on how Hollywood works, I find.
I guess I feel like sometimes there are no coincidences.
That's how I almost got the next James Bond.
Because your name is similar to Sean Connery, yes.
Yeah. Really, they talked to me, they talked to my reps, and then they were like, are you fucking joking? Let's get someone else with a different name.
Well, I think you would have been great, Sean.
Thank you. So he comes out of his dream. He doesn't understand what's going on. He thought he left the Robosaurus in the hallway, but now or he thought he left it in the hallway, but now it's back in the closet. I don't know. It was confusing the way they were going in and out of the dream sequences. I did not totally follow that.
It was. And that's one of many motifs that they hit in this pilot, where it's like his dream sequences, his conversations with Jeremiah, and it's basically just all a series of very long refusals of the call over and over and over again. And if you're building this pilot, and this is my central, I don't even know if it's my central problem. It's one of my many problems. If you're building a pilot to Robosaurus, why are we waiting this long to get to Robosaurus? And I believe the answer is because it's too expensive to have Robosaurus through the whole thing, causing havoc. And then, of course, that goes back to the prior question. Why are you building a pilot about Robosaurus then?
Well, and also it means that at some point there was a conversation, which was one of the reasons they led to not turning the pilot into a show, which was like, if we don't have enough money to spend on Robosaurus, that we only have him in 5 minutes at the end of the pilot, does that mean we're going to have episodes down the line where we never even see Robosaurus?
Which is probably why it's called Steel Justice and not Robosaurus.
Because Steel Justice works both ways. It could be the Robosaurus or it could be Nash himself.
Right, that's right. He is the Steel Justice. Actually, I guess there's no, I don't know, unless you're talking about the badge, why would he be steel?
I'm assuming that every once in a while, Justice is about to get away and then he steals it.
Nash steals it or somebody else steals it?
Nash steals justice from the mouth of defeat.
All right.
Next scene, we're in court. Gomez has his day in court. And he's going to jail for life. Although, as it turns out, the arraignment went downhill, unfortunately. They couldn't get him. He gets away. Or the arraignment went south, is what they say. Sorry, guys, the arraignment went south.
Yeah. And it seems like it's like, oh, this is like the system's rigged or whatever. It just seems like that guy's a bad lawyer.
Uh-huh.
And as in life, justice is not served.
They did say something that I thought was funny, which was that in the shootout, the old man was killed and they couldn't tell if it was from Gomez's gun or the cop's gun. So they didn't want to explore it any further.
Right. That was the reason. And they also said procedure because she lit a fire outside which is a terrible.
Right.
Like Gina lights a fire outside of Gomez's room and says fire, and then he just immediately starts shooting. So it's just and immediately it's like, ooh, clever. No, it's not a clever plan. It immediately failed. So that's like police procedure. And I think that's trying to imply like these guys are renegades, except it just all it does is highlight their incompetence. So I don't know what the purpose of it.
Do you think there was an alternate version of that scene where they try to open the door and one of them goes, like, they go up to the door and they're like, it's locked, and the other one goes, shoot, and then he shoots through the door? Like they were just trying to find a way to do some clever wordplay on him shooting.
I think any of these things would have been better options.
So Gomez is out. Gina, he says something taunting to them. Gina starts to go after him, and somebody says the classic, maybe it's Nash, says the classic line, "It's not worth it," which is my favorite thing that always happens in stopping fights. It's not worth it, it's just not worth it.
There's a million things with of just like hitting all of the classic cliches, cop cliches in this almost to an admirable degree.
Right. Like they really had to have a checklist to make sure they hit everything.
I don't remember when this conversation happens, but Gina has a conversation with, I assume is the captain. Is that the guy who takes to hit another cliche later, his badge and gun are taken away, of course, inevitably.
It's either the captain or it's the civilian who answers the phones.
And he says to Gina that you said he was getting better. And it's because Nash's excuse to leave is that he was going to see the game tonight, but the Bullets aren't playing tonight. And so that's his example of like why he's clearly going insane.
Uh-huh. Did he say the Bullet? And now I might just be making shit up, but did he say the Bullets aren't playing tonight, or did he say the Bullets are playing in Philadelphia tonight?
Oh, that might have been what it is.
Because I felt like he was saying they have a game somewhere else. Also, do you ever have that moment where you hear some phrase and it just triggers a memory in your mind of a Jay Leno joke from The Tonight Show?
Thankfully, no.
Yeah, that
What
happens.
was the joke?
So the joke, and I had to look it up because I wanted to get it word perfect.
No, you got to do justice to. You got to do some steel justice to Mr. Leno.
So Jay Leno's joke was the Washington Bullets are changing their name. They don't want their team to be associated with crime. From now on, they'll just be known as the Bullets. And the best part about that is that I found it on a website called Brainy Quotes.
Uh-huh.
So long live Jay Leno.
How do you feel about that joke, John?
It's not a terrible joke.
It's not a terrible joke. Yeah.
You know?
Side note, also, that did make me think like, wait, is this supposed to be Washington, D.C.?
Which I think it is. I mean, that's why I would assume that that's what,
But that's the only reference, right?
Right. We never know anything beyond that. And so, he takes off because he's going to watch the game. He's going to the game. Again, classic cops. They're just drinking way too much in this bar.
Yeah, Steve, the quintessential stereotypical 90s black cop, just to an offensive degree. He says in the background, just sort of, make mine a Pardugal. And I was like,
no. He said, he said, make mine a quadruple.
Oh, a quadruple. Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Which
I thought it was a future
also,
drink.
No, it's also a sign of a significant drinking problem,
Sure.
If you're even getting a double, that's a lot. You get a quadruple, oh boy, it's going to be a long night.
When we go into the Nash video memories of his kid, by the way, and I can't remember if it was when he was awake or it was one of his endless dream sequences, because of all the polls where they're pulling from all the different sources of other movies. That to me is very RoboCop, because he has flashbacks with him and his family, which is, I guess it's a classic cliche even before RoboCop, but that's the one that was the most quintessential to me. And this future sort of new Detroit kind of vibe, except this is new Washington, D.C., of like sort of dystopia. And I wonder if they were even influenced by Ed 209 to be for Robosaurus.
Well, it's also nice to get that flashback because then we understand what the relationship between the family was before this terrible tragedy, because you're never sure what a family is like. And this case, they all say, I love you a number of times to each other. So there was a lot of love in that household.
That's the cue that these people cared about each other.
So that this has really affected him. Your son dies and you don't love him. It's annoying, but it's not the worst thing in the world. You don't spend the rest of your life obsessing about it. But if you love your son and he dies,
it's going to stick with you then.
Yeah.
If you love your son,
it's a tough blow.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're into a scene with, this is a great like dystopian party scene where everybody's playing the drums by beating on guns, basically. And I guess it's a party for Gomez's release.
That's what it's like in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's always the people with weird haircuts and like fingerless gloves in these movies, right? Of like,
right.
It's almost like a weird, this is obviously a network show, but it's almost like a weird indicator of sexuality of like, this is how we dress now because we're all different, and they're all writhing in ecstasy that Gomez has gotten off on his trial.
Yeah.
But he needs to go see the Colonel. They want him to go see the Colonel.
Who is Roy Brocksmith is playing it. You may remember most from Total Recall as Dr. Edgemar, as the guy who explains everything to Schwarzenegger, but his character actor's been in a million different things. And I kind of feel like if we're looking at the performances, I kind of feel like Jeremiah J.A. Preston as the guide is maybe the most solid performance, but I feel like this guy, Roy Brocksmith, is the most in keeping with what this show should be, because it's an incredibly arch supervillain performance.
He's a villain, yeah.
They even give him a tiny chihuahua to pet later. It's a really campy performance, and I kind of feel like it works for the purpose of this. It's sort of one of the only points of interest.
He has the I think it's a dog. He has the dog in this scene, and it's great. Again, it's like when a family says "I love you." If a guy has a tiny dog in his arms, he's a bad person. You know?
It's usually a cat, so I admire them for going a different direction.
Well, you have to switch it up. I do think he did a great job. Like he was the thing I found the most entertaining in the entire show. And I think it's fucked up that they recast that role in Boogie Nights when Burt Reynolds played the Colonel, you know?
I needed a second to catch up to that one.
So he is selling arms to someone named Tyrone, who is there to buy MG78s.
Sure.
But the Colonel has exciting news, which is that they now have something called MG80s. So it's two better than the MG78s.
I mean, the math checks out. You can't dispute it. And this is a scene where he sort of basically presents what he's presenting is a rocket launcher, right?
Yeah.
And this is the thing that I was a little confused about, because rocket launchers were already a thing in popular culture at this point, and obviously in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Why is everybody getting all hot and bothered about this friggin' thing?
Why? Well, first of all, they're hot and bothered because the ozone layer has disappeared.
Yes.
Yeah,
right. That is the truth. They need a cool juicer around to help.
Cool juice runner.
Cool juice runner. That's what it was.
But yeah, he's very excited because he tells him this is the perfect drive-by device, and I believe in response, the other guy says, "Yeah, boy," which just was the weirdest moment in the whole thing because I was like, "Who wrote that?" You know.
I'm sure that's a Crow. That's a Crow original. Originally Daniel Day-Lewis, that was his catchphrase in Last of the Mohicans. But man,
stay alive and I will find you. Yeah, boy.
So the rocket launcher bumped me. The other thing that's sort of like in terms of tone, and I actually think this is like, yeah, you might as well go for it. You're already halfway into like stealing from every source. I kind of don't have a problem with someone DJ mix mastering all the different sources in, as long as it's kind of cool and cohesive. And so like an aspect is they put ads on the walls with exactly the same oral tone of voice, kind of sound quality tone of voice of like an ad echoing through the canyons of the city. Another thing that's funny is even though they put it later like a big screen on a truck, like they have one where it's just a series of old-fangled 92 era TVs stacked up to make the image, which I assume was a budgetary issue. Mm-hmm. And it's very strange that they're stealing from a movie 10 years before and look like this was made 10 years before that because it's so crappy.
So who knows what's going to happen with the Colonel and Tyrone, but we know now we have the thread in the story of like, these are the bad guys. And of course, we sort of suspect that these people will have been involved. It will turn out they will have been involved in the death of young Davy Nash, although that has not been specifically mentioned yet. But immediately, you know, you go, uh-oh, these guys, there's going to be a reckoning basically at some point.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, he's got to have more motivation than just being a cop. Trying to put away the criminals.
Right. This is also the scene where we first hear about the Diaz brothers, who are obviously going to be important later in the episode. And we're going to see a lot more of the Diaz brothers, who also apparently sell weapons, and Tyrone could go get his weapons from them. So I got excited in that moment. I was like, if this is the Colonel, I can't wait to see.
You think there was a bigger bad waiting for us?
Yeah, I can't wait to see what the Diaz brothers are like.
Right. And that is kind of, they keep stacking it. So it's like they got Arturo, and then I don't remember his name. There's the singing criminal.
Which one?
The guy who keeps, every time they cut to him, he's always sort of like singing a ditty to himself before he does something, some kind of blows something up with a rocket launcher.
Jared.
He's the main.
Jared.
Yes. So you got Gomez, then you got the Colonel, then you got that guy, and then you also, it's just like they keep stacking up these people. And
Jared is the guy who you're talking about, who, when he was going to kill Nash by running him over with the car, you knew what he was trying to do because he was just going, die, 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 die. Yeah.
Right. That's him. And I don't know, just to skip ahead for a moment, when he is provoked by the colonel, who the colonel says, "You didn't even want to kill him,
you coward,"
which is a crazy statement. That like, oh, you failed in killing him, so that means you didn't want to.
Yeah.
Which is attacking his manhood. His choice of like, oh, now I'm not going to take any chances. Instead of shooting him or blowing him up with this rocket launcher, I'm going to run him down with my car.
You have your choice of weapons. Automobile accident. Okay, so we're back at Nash. First Nash goes to the library to find out about what his dream means.
And he has to look at those maps from the credits.
It's also funny to just be in a library like in the 21st century now.
Future dystopian library. There's only 3 books left, and one of them is burned.
Sir, you owe a book from 1983. You took out Mutiny on the Bounty. And this is where we meet Nicole for the first time.
Right.
Who is his neighbor.
Played by Joan Chen, who's, a well-known character actor from the time, most well-known to me on Twin Peaks as Josie. This is a crazy question, Sean. You've seen Twin Peaks, right?
Not a long time, but yes.
Okay, yeah. Every once in a while, I'll run into somebody who's seen Twin Peaks. We'll definitely do Twin Peaks at some point. And
I never watched the new one. I still haven't watched that. I heard it was great, but I still haven't seen it.
And we can watch the pilot for both of them.
By the way, this is a good example of, instead of saying "I love you" in my family, we watched Twin Peaks together. That was like a family activity.
That to me is more of an indication of "I love you." It's more than I get in my family. Nicole, Joan Chen is playing Nicole. She's clearly interested in him.
Mm-hmm.
She's clearly being set up as a romantic interest.
Yeah.
The dynamics between Nash and women in this pilot are very confusing.
I agree. And well, we'll get to more about that stuff with his partner, because
he's clearly being polite to her. She is fully hitting on him, and it seems like he's not even processing it in this first scene with Joan.
Right. Although, again, that's an example of everything in this pilot has to take 3 times as long as it should, because the next time he encounters her, he says, "Let's go to a bar," or "Let's go to an ice bar," or whatever.
Wait, is that a different time than when she sees the kids playing in the street in the hydrant?
I think that's the scene before they go up to his apartment, and then he goes, "Do you want to go to an ice bar?" So that's continuous on the kids playing in the street, I think.
So I guess it makes sense that we see this first scene where she's clearly hitting on him and he's not responding other than with politeness.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's that second scene where he's looking at kids playing in a hydrant in the street, which I don't know if that's supposed to suggest it's an economically challenged area, or
I took it as just an homage, because they're pulling from all these sources. I took it as an homage to Do the Right Thing. That was, let's get some of that in there.
That's probably Crow's only experience with a diverse, underprivileged neighborhood. And Joan Chen sidles up to his car and says, "Tell me the truth. Would I look ridiculous if I walked over there and took my clothes off to join them?" So it's just a crazy thing that's like, okay, you clearly were like, well, what if she goes over and she says something flirty to him? And it's like, then they ignored the fact that she's saying, "Can I take my clothes off?" in front of those children.
Mm-hmm.
Just to like, I don't care. Just shortcut it. She says this. He says, "I'd have to arrest you." And then she says, handcuffs, the whole thing. That might be fun. And it's sort of like, they wrote the first scene. He doesn't respond at all. And they're like, I guess tracking it to, I'm going to have to up the ante and just be completely obvious to a weird degree where I'm saying, what if I take my clothes off in front of children and I'm into bondage? And then he finally invites her to a bar.
I think she's saying something. They did cut the part out where she goes, "Would I look ridiculous if I went over there and took all my clothes off?" And then she goes, "If I was wearing a clown mask," because that would be too ridiculous. I just like to think about Joan Chen in a clown mask.
I'm not a kink shamer.
Yeah. So we're still before all that.
Sorry, didn't mean to jump ahead.
No. We
have to add more momentum to this pilot.
This This episode is going to take us as long to. By the way, I couldn't believe how long this thing was. I think we need to, when we're looking at these pilots, I would like it if we could check how long it is before we decide on them, because it took me so long to get through this. Because I'm assuming this was a two-parter, right? Like they showed, or they would have done the first episode and then the second episode.
Yes.
And instead, it all gets condensed into 1 hour and a half long.
And or it was just it was a movie length pilot for it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of our hour-long pilots from this era or otherwise are going to be this long. This is how long Walker, Texas Ranger, is. And, was.
Right, but even Walker, Texas Ranger didn't feel like I was sitting there for 11 hours while I was watching.
Well, I think that's when you're getting into the quality of the episodes. And a lot of the failed pilots are going to be slow. That's why they weren't picked up.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we see him dreaming again. He goes into he dreams of his kid. Like, we see the kid being blown up a number of times over the course of this episode. This is one of those times, but then the Robosaurus comes out in his dream and he goes into the kid's bedroom and the Robosaurus has a little car in its mouth. So there's some weird connection between his dreams and reality. Then he's talking to his shrink.
Now, this scene to me is for any fan of Blade Runner. If you look at this scene and you compare it to the Voight-Kampff interview in Blade Runner at the top of Blade Runner, I mean, obviously the Blade Runner one is artful and beautiful, but it's just like so obviously like there's the fan above that Sean has pointed out is due to the
atmosphere, the climate.
Yes, the environmental crisis. It's backlit. It's got slats that the light is coming through. It's just like it could not be more Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm. Also, the actor who plays the shrink is Vincent Chase. So clearly he was doing other stuff outside of Entourage.
It is. See, that to me is another thing of like, did somebody see this guy's name as Vincent Chase? That's a great name for a character. But that seems like more that could be parallel thinking.
How do you come up with names for your characters? Well, honestly, I look at old failed pilots and just see who played the characters I like.
There are worse ways to come up with names.
Yeah. So he wants to give up his gun and a badge. He feels like he's not responsible right now, and he needs to, because he's having these weird dreams. By the way, I'm just going to say this because this was weird to me, that every time they talk about the guy who appears in his dreams, they mention that he's a black guy. Like
every time.
You could just say there's the same guy in my dreams. I don't know. Then we have
a black guy. That makes it a little bit more mystical.
Right. He's the guy who played the judge in A Few Good Men. So then we see Jared again, and he blows up a truck.
Yes.
And it turns out that that's the truck that the Diaz brothers are in. So we never even got to know the Diaz brothers, and they've already been destroyed.
You must have been real upset then. You must have been like, what are the Diaz brothers?
I had a whole thing in my head of what they were going to be like, and it was going to be
sketches,
exciting, and they were going to be having a good time. Like, they're brothers, and yet they're at the top of a criminal organization. That's always more fun than just two guys who got to know each other. They would be like, remember when Ma said we were never going to be anything? And look at us now. Look at us now, Sparky.
Sparky Diaz. We also skipped over that just before they get blowed up, they have a shot of a little person, a shirtless little person on a tricycle that is riding past, and I was like, is he going to be part of the? Nope. Just
right.
Hey, this is what dystopia, some weird dystopia, little people on tricycles without even a shirt. Oh my goodness. The future is crazy.
Because this is so focused on the death of a child, I assumed that guy was going to get run over by the truck. Like there was going to be another incident of somebody being killed, but it was just atmosphere. It was just, this is how things are weird now.
Yep.
And then after that explosion, the cops are there trying to figure out what happened. How did this go down?
Yeah.
And Nash shows up very late. They think he's, they're very upset with him for not being there. Because that's what you focus on at a crime scene is like, who's here and who's not here right now, roll call. But he shows up and he's about to quit the job. He feels like he's not qualified to even be doing the job anymore. and then suddenly somebody shows him a piece of, I guess, shrapnel or something, and it has numbers and silk screen and Cyrillic. Like, he immediately puts together all these pieces of like what's been in his dreams.
Sure.
And it just flips him completely, and he's back on the job.
Right.
Yeah, it was like very close that would have been, that was the initial ending for the pilot, was just him quitting, and then the next episode was going to be, what's his new job? Where is he going to interview?
And then somebody realized, wait, we didn't include any Robosaurus.
We don't have the money, Bob. So then he sees the guy from his dreams standing in the crowd.
Yes.
And he thinks he might be dreaming. He's not sure. He focuses on the guy. They start to have a conversation. The guy lists all the things that he has seen. He's like,
I saw the last dragon slain in Britain. I saw the Wright brothers laugh, like all these things. And this is the point that is the most clear to me, even though it's a great performance by J. Preston. This is the point that's most clear to me, is like, I have two questions. One, he later says he's not immortal, that he can be killed.
Mm-hmm.
But he can't die of natural causes. But this is my question. The way he's describing all these things he's seen throughout history, and that he later he says he's 2,356 years old, that suggests he's more of an immortal than he is a time traveler, which is how he's set up.
Right.
So is he jumping through time, or is he
living through it?
Yes, it seems like he's more living through it. So it seems like they're not clear on their own mythology.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, like I just feel like, because I was thinking about that too, and he says he's seen Halley's Comet 14 times or something like that.
Right.
And that only comes once every 75 or 76 years. So that means he's, even before he says later he's been around for 2,000 whatever years. But the fact that he's seen it every time. See, I think if you were just living through things, why would you end up with the Dutch guy who invented the microscope and the Wright brothers? And he saw Lincoln cry, which was a very specific moment in Lincoln's career. It was at one of the Lincoln Douglas debates. But so to me, I was like, oh, it must be like tourism. Like, it's like when people go back to see the Grand Canyon over and over again, but instead of having a map to the location, he has a map to the time, and he goes, oh, I know when this thing is going to happen. Let me go see when it happens.
But then if that is the case, and sort of Time Bandit style, he's sort of jumping through to different points in history, then are they suggesting, when he says he's 2,300 years old, that he's been jumping around for 2,300 years? Or is he jumping on the timeline of 2,300 years, and actually he's only his actual age?
He's only 57.
Yeah.
I would take it as the first one, that he is both 2,500 years old and he has been doing this jumping around the entire time. Like, I feel like that list of things he's seen,
yes,
he probably could go on for 2 days about the stuff he's seen.
And I would go further to say, I think he is just 2,300 years old. He has seen all those things throughout time. He is not, as the show says, a time traveler. They are just saying he's a time traveler because to someone like Nash, it seems like this guy's a time traveler because of how much he's seen. Because otherwise, nothing they're saying tracks.
So you're saying he doesn't actually travel through time. He just exists over a long period of time.
No, but however, he is one of the ones at the beginning who says his opening VO says, since the world began, time travelers have journeyed across the globe on a pilgrimage, a quest to locate and nurture those with a gift. And maybe he's just saying there are time travelers, and the time travelers do go on a pilgrimage to nurture those with a gift. That's not who I am, though.
Right.
That's why he's so vague about who it is. I'm actually close to an immortal, but who can be killed.
Right. That is where they show the time tunnel. So you think the fact that they show the time tunnel in there, he would just see that and go, you know what? I'll walk. I'm fine.
I could just live.
I'm just going to live through this.
Through the time, it's easier. And that way I'll learn how to break out of jail and stuff. Yeah, I think it's all, his phraseology is all misdirection.
Whatever the case, he gets arrested by Nash in this moment.
Right.
And taken to jail.
Yes. And they find out that he has no past. He doesn't have a record. People are baffled by this. There's no way.
Well, one of the things that happens along the way is we see the classic sergeant behind the desk who knows everything, because Nash has to take him the shrapnel and say, like, do you recognize this?
Yes.
And of course, it's the great Arlie Ermy from Full Metal Jacket.
And that to me was the craziest thing, is that it's Arlie Ermy 5 years after working with Kubrick, and he's in this fucking bonkers pilot. Granted, in another 2 years he'll be working with Fincher, but like, what was going on? Was he just like, all right, it's another cop character, whatever?
I was just waiting for him to go, like, you know, do you know that you are not worth the spit on the germs, on the dirt, on the dog shit on the bottom of my shoe? You know, like, you can't look at that guy and not think of, like,
it's a very sedate character.
Yeah.
Slightly explaining stuff.
He's just there for exposition, and it turns out this is related to the death of Nash's son.
I wonder if Fincher saw him in this and was like, you know what? He can't just play a sergeant. I think he'd be great as a cop. Although I think he is a sergeant in this.
Look, the screen trade is rough, man. It's rough for writers and it's rough for actors. You just, it's mercurial. You know, 1 minute you're the star of Full Metal Jacket, and the next minute you're this guy. You're
in Robosaurus. Steel Justice.
Not in the credits, by the way, uncredited.
Well, they wanted it to be a surprise for the audience.
Right.
Unless he had his name taken off it.
That would not surprise me, honestly. So a couple things happen. Gina wants him to come to dinner. He doesn't want to go because he's got too much going on. But then we get to his interview with J. Jonah Jameson in the jail cell, where he finds out that he was born in a Mesopotamian village. He's 2,356, which means 644 years from now he'll be 3,000. It felt a little like they were just going through a word problem at this point. You know,
it's very long. It was so long.
Although I did like, first of all, a lot of the background dialogue in this show really made me laugh because it was so obviously not connected to what the actors were doing in the scene.
Right.
Like, and I don't mean that the stars, I mean like the background actors were doing something and then we were supposed to be able to hear them. And it was clearly, you know, one of those like loop groups where everybody gets together and they're like, make it sound like you guys are upset. And you just hear a bunch of people going, come on, don't do that. Get over here. This is crazy.
Well, I don't know if this is what you're leading. You're leading to the Steve thing?
No, I don't even know what the Steve thing is.
Steve thing. It was hilarious to me. Steve, our character that you were mentioning from before.
Oh, yeah.
He goes, Jeremiah J. Jonas is his name. And you hear in the background Steve go, JJ.
Oh, that is what I was leading to. I did not realize that it was Steve because it was off screen.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that was just Loop Group, which is just
that
a bunch of actors that were hired for the day that were not in the pilot.
It would make way more sense if it was Steve.
Yeah.
In my head, it was like, oh, the guy in the next cell is just making fun of him, you know?
Yeah.
Like, JJ.
Either one makes equal sense.
Right. And then we go through the scene that we already talked about with Joan Chen, where she wants to take her clothes off and get handcuffed.
In front of the kids.
And then she wants to wear a horsetail. He gets home. Robosaurus is not in the closet. This is where I started writing down him instead of him. And I was like, oh boy, he's done with the American accent.
It's also like the amount of waiting for something to happen with Robosaurus and the way they keep playing it out is this toy is doing weird things in the apartment is bizarre. And I assume, again, it's like, okay, they're probably trying to sell this toy and they're trying to appeal to kids. So it's all about Robosaurus. And really, I'll just get to this now. I don't know if I would say it's the downfall of this pilot because there's so many things that are wrong in this pilot. But the essential problem to me is you're selling this concept about Robosaurus. You're locked into Robosaurus. That is clearly what they came to you to build something around. And then you're like, I don't know if there's enough. So you start to go into, well, I'm going to do this Blade Runner dystopia thing, and it's a cop who's in this world, and the kid died, and it's like, all right, that's already too much. You're already in like hat on a hat territory, or Robosaurus on a hat territory, or hat on a Robosaurus, which actually that would be fine.
Depends on the hat.
That's true. It should be kind of a metal kind of Robosaurus themed hat, although it could be a cowboy hat. Anyway, I think I'm turning.
Why is the Robosaurus wearing a beret?
I'm not making this drag as much as the Steel Justice pilot. So,
by the way, we're almost halfway through the episode, folks.
So, I guess my issue is you're going to set it in this future dystopia. I guess it makes sense that if you're tied to a big robot dinosaur, then you should have to come up with some justification for why. Why are you not building it on future tech then? Why are you adding in this time-traveling magic guy who's apparently also immortal? Like,
and an incredible tenor sax player.
And this guy, well, honestly, that was the like fourth hat that they show up in one scene, and it's just classic 92 guy with sunglasses in a jazz club.
Jazz musician, yeah.
Like, why is that the side thing? Like, is that going to play in heavily to the series? Is that a feature for the audience? Anyway, you got robot dinosaur, future dystopian cop, and immortal magician from the past, and it's like tied to the immortal magician from the past sort of thread is that this guy is magic. Nash is magic, and he can summon Robosaurus out of the toy. And it's like none of these two sides of the equation, the sci-fi part of the equation, the magic part of the equation, really are cohesive. And it kind of really gives you even more admiration for George Lucas that he sort of found a way to kind of make the mysticism and the sci-fi elements kind of cohesive. Because in this, they're crammed together in a haphazard way that is nothing but distracting and undermines the show the entire time. And you could have just had, if you wanted to, look, okay, yeah, I got to tie it to the kid. The kid's got to, he's the emotional motivation for Nash. And so it's tied to why don't you have that the kid was a tech genius who built Robosaurus or built a toy that could become Robosaurus, and that's your connection.
Right. And I also feel like, I mean, you already said this was probably for budgetary reasons, but I feel like what they're doing with the toy is justifying why it eventually turns into Robosaurus.
Right.
But how many times do we need to see the toy before we go, oh, I get where the Robosaurus came from. I understand how this happened. Like, we know this guy transforms things. We know there's a toy. We know at some point there's going to be some kind of steel justice. The toy is made of steel.
Nash is going to steal justice from the jaws of defeat at some point. The jaws not being Robosaurus's jaws.
No. He's too busy munching on cars and jackets.
Yeah. It's a lot of stuff.
I also like how you're calling that guy magic. Like, I guess he's magic because he's not a time traveler, right? He doesn't actually travel through time. He's just magic because he has very low cholesterol and has lived for an incredibly long period of time.
Yes, I guess just him saying I'm incredibly healthy is not as impressive to a teenage boy watching this. I'm curious what your take is, because they were clearly going for Blade Runner, this dark dystopian thing, and RoboCop, but they were also kind of going for, they have this sort of Jerry Goldsmith-like adventure-y, lilting kind of themes coming through it. So they're also going for kind of an adventure-y sort of magic story. I felt like at a certain point, like, oh, they're just going for kids, except I think that Crow really wanted to do a dark dystopian show, even though it's clearly not that dark just because it's not that successful at it. Do you feel like those tones, like that it was that heavily dark and dystopian? Like to the point where a teenage boy would not be into it, or he would be into it?
I felt like everything was definitely in the realm of PG to G, except, which is why the whole thing about handcuffs really surprised me. I was like, whoa, that's
Right.
on a different level than everything else that's happened in this whole show. And it stays there because we never see anything like that again. Like it doesn't go any further than that,
Right.
So
I
I
guess
do
going
feel
back on it, I loved Terminator when I was a kid. So, and I loved all these movies. I loved Blade Runner and everything else. So I guess it would appeal to all this dark dystopian thing, would appeal to all ages. I guess, well, what I'm really saying is it feels joyless.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, it's not cool enough. It's not fun enough.
Well,
So
I think it's
and yet it has these elements that should be fun.
I think it's really hard to, I mean, it's kind of what you're saying about George Lucas. It's really hard to go, here's 9 different things that I want to synthesize and steal from and not have it feel very mechanical and very constructed and very joyless, because there's not one thing. Like, I'm assuming anybody working on something like Terminator or Blade Runner or something like that, and I don't mean anybody working on it, because I'm sure there are people who are like, I got to go get more coffees for these guys. Jesus Christ. But like James Cameron was like, I love this idea. I want to express this idea. This is going to be so fun. And that is just not something you can do when you're trying to fit all these different things into one package,
Right. But to me, the critical mistake is you can do your Blade Runner thing and your Robosaur thing, although I think it would have worked better if they just said it in present day. You can do those two things together because at least there's a tech science element that you could tie together. As soon as you go to the magic element or whatever the hell he is, I mean, there's some kind of mystical ability that he's saying the guy has. So you can call that what you want. As soon as you go into that,
control his own blood pressure.
He can change a small Trojan horse into a full Trojan horse should he be called upon.
Yes. He's a conjurer. But yeah, I agree. It feels joyless. It certainly was joyless. I was not filled with joy while I was watching it.
And are you normally filled with joy?
Great point.
Can't put it all on the terrible pilot.
It's true. So then we see Jared, and he puts a device.
Yeah.
Puts something in Nash's apartment. We know it's a bomb because it looks like it's a clock with Play-Doh on it. And that is always...
I mean, maybe Brock is right that he doesn't really want to kill him, because that was one of the moments I was just like, he's asleep in his apartment. You've gained access to his apartment through some tech and you don't just kill him. You're going to leave a time bomb.
But that would have gotten us to the Robosaurus too quickly. We would have had to have the Robosaurus come out and attack him.
I see.
And instead, it just takes the bomb out, and we can see the explosion in the distance, and it's not a problem.
One of the funniest shots is the Robosaurus, by the way, after it's disposed of the bomb, just sort of rolling down the street.
He now knows something is going on because he was having this dream, and then the explosion happened right near his house. So he goes to Gina, and this is one of the weirder moments to me in the pilot, and this goes back to what you were talking before about women. He gets Gina he's like, you got to help me find this truck. It's got a thing on the side that's a genie, or it's Aladdin trucking or something. And then she says she'll do it, and he kisses her on the mouth.
I think you're even making it too normal. Because I don't think she agrees to do it before he kisses her full on the mouth. I think he just says, just work on it. Will you, Gina? Maybe get the guys to help out. And then he kisses her, just full kiss on the mouth. And she doesn't look like, oh, this guy. She looks like what the moment reads to us as, which is, what the fuck? What is happening? Is he into me? We've been partners for years. He's never done anything like this. So that is what the moment reads like.
It feels very strange.
It almost feels like the actor Robert Taylor improvised it, and the actress was just responding to it.
Well, yes, but I will say, in defense of it, it was a different time, and this is when partners just kissed each other on the mouth in general in cop shows, and it wasn't necessarily you can't judge from the standards now stuff that happened in 1992.
Right.
That was just a time.
That's a perfect example of we're judging it by 2023 standards. of when cops are no longer allowed to randomly kiss each other on the mouth
right,
with no motivation after years of being partners.
I mean, how many episodes do you remember where Ponch and John kissed each other on the mouth because they were partners? Then we go to the club again. The guy is just on stage by himself improvising on his tenor sax.
Right.
And he's like, okay, I'm ready to talk to you. So he gives him even more exposition about what is going to go on with him. That events can't be transformed. Things can be transformed. You're a transformer. I don't know why they didn't say transformer, because that would have, well, I guess there's copyright issues with using that term.
I assume so. But that is a nice backdoor way for them to get the word transformer, and which is obviously what they're going for with this toy.
Yeah, he's trying to figure out what are you going to transform? What's the thing you're going to do? What's the thing your son loved? He loved this Robosaurus. It made him feel safe and protected. Wouldn't you like to feel the same way? You got to dream this, or you got to, I don't know what you got to do. You got to go to the magic castle and sort of transform it into a giant Robosaurus.
I think part of the problem is that Nash only practices close-up magic. Jeremiah wants him to kind of go to more.
That's all. That's all interesting, Jeremiah. What's that behind your ear? What? A 50-cent piece.
Then he sees the Colonel. Nash confronts the Colonel for the first time, and it's another hilarious scene with him. And I like it being called out, although it makes no sense, that Nash asks him, is Colonel basically, is that a nickname, or were you in the armed services? And the guy says, my rank was bestowed upon me by certain influential members of this community. And it's sort of like, so it's a nickname then, huh? You're saying it with pride, but it's basically just...
For 6 years, I worked at the drive-thru at the local KFC, and people got to know me there at first.
But then it became a fun thing, and everybody was in on it.
But here's another. This is another of those moments where I'm like, do we really? Because he shows up at the warehouse, then they walk him into the warehouse, then they walk him down the stairs. Then they walk him down the next stairs, then down the hallway, then through the place where all the weapons are. Like, can't we just cut to the office? He has to see the crates, but can't we just cut to the office? You know?
Right.
And then the Colonel also taunts him because Colonel outranks Lieutenant.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, why are you... It's not a real rank. You can't hold that over him.
I just promoted myself to General.
And then we get to the thing that we were sort of talking about, where the singing criminal runs him over, and die. And then it just as collateral damage, Gina is killed. And this is very late in the pilot to be introducing the other cliche of dead partner, and in keeping with this guy's Crow's pattern of hat on a hat. Then when she dies, it's like, it's not enough that she just dies. We got to really motivate Nash's anger. And that's why they wrote in that he kisses her and that she's suddenly thinking maybe something's going to happen between me and Nash, which is such an 11th hour kind of ad that wasn't established earlier. It's like, you got to go back to the beginning of your pilot. You can't just fix it from the middle. Then she's dying and she's like, you know what else? I know you've always thought of me more as a boy than a girl. And basically, when you get to heaven, though, I'll be waiting for you up there. It's like, what is happening?
Here's what I was glad about is that she dies and her eyes close on their own. Like, I was just glad that they didn't go for wave
his hand over them.
Yeah. Close her eyes for her after she died. I was like, oh, okay. So at least once you didn't take the opportunity to do something we had seen a million
I'm sure
times.
They were in the edit room and Crow was like, oh, why did you do that? I should have asked him to put his hands close her eyes.
Why did she close her own eyes? That's not how people die.
I will say the explosive boom they use for his gun, which is also very Blade Runner. At least it's a nice kind of like, ooh, that sounds like a little bit of a different gun. So
a big, heavy noise. Yeah.
Good job to the sound department.
Mm-hmm. So then we go and we're back at the station, and the guy who is either the captain or the phone answering person is, I need your gun and your badge. I'm going to take your gun and your badge.
Right.
And he's not allowed to be involved in the investigation anymore. Then we're back home. Nicole is there again. Like, again, nothing really happens, but she's hanging around with him.
But he is sawing off a shotgun, which is a nod to Mad Max, which I don't think they ever really employ. It's sort of like he's going to battle. He's got to saw off his shotgun. He doesn't really, he shoots it once, but it's not like, oh, because I'm going to be in close quarters, I got to use this shot off shit. Just like, nope.
Just a cool thing to be doing.
Yep.
By the way, I'm going to push the stealing from everywhere thing one step too far and say that in the moment where Gina dies and he gets down on his knees and puts his hands over his head, to me that felt very Charlton Heston at the end of Planet of the Apes. So he makes his own gun. He gets there. He gets Colonel's place. The guide is there. There's guards. He doesn't know how to get in. The guide knows what's going on in his head. He's like, are you here because you want to die? Which is always an interesting moment in these things.
Lethal Weapon.
Mm-hmm. He's just tired of it all. He feels powerless. He doesn't want to feel powerless anymore.
Right.
And then the guide reiterates that he can be killed.
It's time for a trial by fire.
Trial by fire.
Tests his mettle. And he walks out and basically provokes the guards, including the singing criminal. And that's what does it. And they have a thing, which they also did this in the Walker, Texas Ranger thing, which there was also a dead partner where he calls back to the advice of in that case, it was his indigenous uncle. And in this case, it's Jay Preston, but he calls back to the advice that he gave him literally 2 seconds before.
Mm-hmm.
It was just concentrate. I don't know if it was follow your dreams. Also, he keeps saying that to him. And so somehow with a bunch of slow-mo shots, he brings Robosaurus to life as a giant mech, which is what we've been waiting for the whole time. Well, he
transforms him into a giant thing somehow.
Sorry, I didn't mean to use the wrong terminology for this.
He's not alive. He's just bigger, and more able to do things.
I feel like the Robosaurus is making decisions. I actually wondered if the implied thing is that is the soul of the sun, but they never clarify that if that is what's going on.
Right.
Side note, I wondered, because this is a universal property, if this final battle, because Robosaurus then comes out and is breathing fire, and I wondered if, because this is universal, if that is the Back to the Future clock, that's the square that they're shooting this in, because it looked like it was sort of stripped really? Version of it. Yeah, but
that's
I can
funny.
Confirm that
it is weird. Like I was not looking at it that way, but I was thinking the entire time, like, this is so contained and so small that it's hilarious to think that they were going to present this as a big city when in fact it was like 4 sets on a lot somewhere, Well,
of course, this raises the question, particularly after this giant sequence of Robosaurus coming out, and he chomps some cars, and then he grabs the singing villain by the coat and is hanging him, and the singing villain, based on how psychotic we've established he is, gives up all the information way too easily. I understand that he's being held in the mouth of this giant mech, but it still seems like he's like, nah, screw you. And then he's immediately like, all right, he went down that tunnel.
He's got an escape tunnel.
And then at the end, the Jeremiah is just like, well, I deserve an apology. And he's like, I'm sorry, you're handsome, you're great. But I guess this raises the question to me. And then in the final thing is that he chews the giant limo of the Colonel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like, oh, he's not gonna, because I thought at first he plucks the singing criminal out and is gonna drop him to his death, which I was like, ooh, that's gonna take it out of the PG area, but he doesn't. But then he does kill the Colonel in his car, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Well, and doesn't he chew up another of the bad guys? Like there was one moment, and again, this was the thing I liked, where it was the loop group thing, where this guy is being chewed up, and you just hear people that are definitely in a room somewhere by a microphone going, no,
JJ. I wasn't sure. I feel like they steered away from any clear deaths, but I think he does kill the Colonel. So I don't know if he's just
he definitely kills the Colonel. Yeah,
that they get away with it there, but maybe they were trying to sort of play both sides of the fence. But my point is this: you're moving forward with a series. Right. This is your central piece. Mm-hmm. Is this Robosaurus? Unless, as we said, they're just trying to use that as their starting point, and then they're going to have it all be about how this guy steals justice. So isn't it like, are you kind of locked into sort of big ticket enemies like, fucking giant military situations or forces or, tanks, or like, aren't you always going to be locked into a giant kind of paramilitary force for Robosaurus to defeat? Because otherwise he's not going to be chasing low-level criminals through back alleys. It's always going to be this. So how is that your series?
I tried to do what you said and play hard to get with Nicole, but it's not working. What else can I do? I don't know what else to tell you. Maybe you should talk to Robosaurus. Like he gets advice from the Robosaurus on how to.
I'm happy to hear about. What is the problem with Nicole?
No. Help me.
I'll talk to her. Nicole, he's afraid of intimacy. And oh no, my fire.
He ends up marrying Nicole.
Should have been more of a classic robot voice. But I was going to do in my own robo version, robo spin.
You can't always do the robot voice because, then where do you go from there?
I mean, I was really trying to give this series legs by choosing the other voice.
Right. All that's left of the Colonel are his glasses.
And I don't know if that's supposed to suggest he might come back.
I think that might be what that is like.
So theoretically, Robo didn't even kill.
He dropped the car, but if the glasses got out, the Colonel could have gotten out too.
That is what that suggests. Yeah. It's a question mark at the end. And then the very last scene is basically Jeremiah and Nash sort of walking off together, sort of, bickering cop style, even though there's nothing fun to be had in that dialogue. And for a second, it felt like Jeremiah saying, now I'm going to go off and help other people and go throughout time.
That was mind-blowing to me. That moment was incredible to me. That might have been my favorite part of the whole pilot.
Do you want to talk about it?
Well, it's a thing where he's clearly speaking to Nash, facing the camera and going, well, nope, I'm going to go off to Tibet and Nepal and spend some time there and whatever. Then they turn around and they're walking away from the camera, and you hear him going, or I might stick around for 50 years. And
which
Nash
to me
like,
is obviously years. Like that's a change.
Yeah,
post.
Exactly.
And I assume it's basically like this is the only character that seems to have any life in this frickin' series, even though it makes no sense why he's there. We should keep the door open that in series we might keep him.
I agree with you, but I also saw it a different way, which was like, this doesn't make any sense. But I saw it as like they just fucked up, Like they showed the executives the pilot, and it's this buddy thing, and they were like, "What the fuck is wrong with you, Crow? You have one of the guys is leaving at the end," and then they had to like write up the stuff where he's like, "No, I'm gonna stick around."
So, from your perspective, was Crow aware that he was writing him out of the show when he wrote those first lines, or he wasn't?
He was like, "We don't need this guy. We got Nash."
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. That's exactly. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's like. They gave him a note that it's like,
right. That's what I mean.
No,
yeah.
He's the one you got to keep this guy.
Do you understand what a pilot is? That's not what I did in Last of the Mohegans. I'll tell you that much.
In Off Limits, Gregory Hines just walks away and leaves Willem Dafoe, and then that's it.
In Dystopian Saigon. Yeah, it was that was such a crazy moment to me. And you got to keep the Colonel alive too, because by far the most interesting character in the pilot, I think,
I mean, that's why they left the glasses.
Right.
Although I don't know how the Colonel's going to see as he escapes.
Maybe that's why, you know what? Now I'm realizing maybe that's why Gina closed her own eyes. She wasn't actually dead. She's coming back in the next episode.
Maybe. If he closed her eyes, then you would know she was dead.
Right.
But if she closed her own eyes, she could just be asleep.
Yeah. So this was a long one, and not a lot happened. We always like to ask the question, would you watch a second episode of this show? So I'm going to put it to you first, Andy. Would you watch a second episode of this show?
I would only watch a second episode of that show if I was doing this podcast and I was like, how do they fucking have this be another episode? There's no other circumstance, having watched this episode, that I would go, yeah, I want to see what happens to these people.
Right.
So I do not give it a green light.
This question is problematic for this pilot because there is no second episode, so we don't actually have a choice. But I agree with you that if there was a second episode, I would just want to see it because I would want to be like, the fuck are they going to do after this?
Right.
You know?
But for the purposes of uniformity moving forward in our podcast, this is a no for you.
100%.
Yes.
I will not, if this exits my mind and I never think about it again, I'll be delighted. Although I won't know it because I won't know that's why I'm delighted, you know?
Right.
I'll be joyful, which apparently you disparaged me for earlier.
I didn't disparage you. I was just for accuracy's sake.
I got the subtext of what you were saying.
Look, I'm no happier than you are.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, no way would I watch a second episode of this. It's not. I can't believe I watched the first episode.
Well, we did it. We got through it. I'm glad we did. It's bonkers. I like to watch bonkers pilots.
This is the main lesson I take away from it.
Yes.
Two things. And they're both
two lessons.
The same lesson. And it's just about acting. It's just about being an actor, which is also relative to everybody living their lives, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you just got to hang in there. Like Arlie Ermy does, I don't know, Full Metal Jacket to me, I'm not saying it's my favorite movie of all time, but it is the only movie I can think of off the top of my head where if I'm just sitting around flipping through the TV and that movie comes on, I will then watch the rest of it every single time.
It can't be the only movie that you do that
I think it's the only one.
What about the Godfather movies?
Boring.
Whatever the case, I agree with you. It is one of those things. And it also, interestingly, is one of those movies where it's like, and there are a lot of examples of this, but it'd be tough to find one that would beat it for this quality of an actor who has never acted before, you have never seen on screen before, that suddenly dominates a movie completely.
Right.
With a fucking perfect performance.
I mean, some of those guys, Matthew Modine was great. D'Onofrio was great in that, whatever. He is the star of that movie, period.
And this is what he's doing 5 years later.
And 5 years later, he's doing this, but then he's doing, he's
doing Seven. Yeah. So,
yeah.
And he's in the Toy Story movies.
And same thing with David Nash, Robert Taylor. Like, he does this, he gets a fucking pilot in 1992 and he goes, I did it. I got a pilot and I'm successful and I can write back to everybody in Perth and tell them they're not gonna have a knockabout lad anymore because I'm gonna go tell all the Crocodile Dundees in the world to go fuck themselves.
Yeah, and then throw
another shrimp on the barbie. How about 2 shrimps on the barbie? Because I'm buying. Because I got a pilot and I got a career. And then he just disappears for 30 years.
Right. And he comes back as Longmire. Now I'm very curious to see what his accent is like in Longmire.
Yes. But, that was, again, I've never watched it, but it's got 60 episodes or something,
I feel like that we should add that to our list just for curiosity.
So it's like, just hang in there and things will work out one way or another,
Is this to counterbalance our misanthropy?
Our usual advice of pull the ripcord immediately. Get out of there.
Bail faster than you can be hurt or disappointed.
The moment something goes wrong, it's time to extricate yourself. So there it is, everybody. Steel Justice, and thumbs down on episode 2 from both Andy and myself, which is one of the rare times you will find us agreeing with network executives. Thank you so much for listening. We will be releasing episodes of this podcast on the 1st and 3rd of each month going forward. You should probably subscribe so that you don't have to remind yourself. Also, follow us on social media at Copilots TV. And if you're wondering where to watch the pilots that we're discussing, just check the show notes. We will always have some kind of indication of where you'll be able to find these pilots, even the obscure ones. They have to be somewhere, otherwise we're not doing them.
And do you like our show, or do you love our show? Or even, you know what, if you hate our show, if you give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it would be very helpful to us. You get your pilot's wings, which is a fake thing. Not real pilot's wings. Who knows? Thank you so much for joining us. Wheels down.
Oh, boy.
We're working on it.
I just like to think about Joan Chen in a clown mask.
I'm not a kink shamer.